Welcome to What America is Thinking for Wednesday, March 20th. It's the first day of spring. Let's hope we've seen the last of winter. I'm Jamal Simmons, and here's the latest on public opinion for you. Our exclusive poll from the Hill and Harris X weighs in on our twice-monthly look at President Trump's job approval. Any changes? Or just slow and steady as she goes? We'll see. Later, the Jewish vote in America. It's been reliably Democratic in the past, but could that be changing? All this is coming up and a lot more because we want to know what's on your mind. Welcome back to What America is Thinking. We've got a first-time panelist joining us today. Welcome, Halie Soifer, Executive Director of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, and our friend, all the way from Poughkeepsie, New York, Lee Marengoff of Marist College. He's Director of the Marist Poll. Thank you both for joining. It's a pleasure to see you here today. So it's time to check in on President Trump's job approval. We do it every couple of weeks to keep an eye on the trend line. A reminder, the numbers in our Hill-Harris X poll last time were around 45% approve, 55% disapprove. And it's pretty much been that way with a point or two fluctuation for a while now. So let's take a look at our new numbers. Well, this is starting to get pretty boring. It looks like nothing's changed. The president still stands at 45% approval, 55% disapprove in our Hill-Harris X poll. The Real Clear Politics average is 43% approval, 54% disapprove. So the president's approval grazed the 50% mark just one time in our poll in early August of 2018. But ever since then, his approval number has mostly hovered in the mid-40s. Lee, in your mind, is there anything that could boost him? Is there any good news? Is there anything that would make people decide, you know what? I think I'm for Trump now and I wasn't for him before.
I guess if the Mueller report came out and it said, we absolutely found nothing anywhere about him that was negative. I'm not sure that would even do a whole lot. I think people pick sides, and came out early. We're in a polarized era that didn't start with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. We've been going that way probably since the early 90s. Yeah. So there's very few people on the fence. And when it comes to Donald Trump, there's even fewer because last time I checked, he's not particularly shy.
By the way, I blame Newt Gingrich for this.
Yeah, well, a lot of it was Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich. I mean, way back when in the early 90s. Yeah.
Newt Gingrich took out a sitting Republican leader, because he wasn't partisan enough. I think that was a big moment in national politics. But that's not the point of our show today. We're talking about Donald Trump. So Halie, first time here. What do you think about these numbers when you take a look at them and you see that President Trump's approval rating really hasn't been moving very much?
It just shows that he represents his base. His base has been consistent since the 2016 election. He speaks solely to them. He represents them. And he's not increasing his support among Americans no matter what he does. In the past week, actually, in the Senate, he was rebuked twice by the Republican-controlled Senate, both on a war powers resolution and then again with regard to his emergency declaration at the border. So if he thought that was going to increase support for him among the American people, it has not worked.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. He hasn't even tried to reach out realistically to any other groups, which is so atypical. It's been the base. It's been all about the base. And Halie makes a good point on that.
Yeah, so the last couple of presidents who've been reelected, let's go a little bit earlier than them. Let's say, so Bill Clinton gets elected with less than 50%, 43% in 1992. He goes up to 49% in 1996. George W. Bush is elected less than 50% in 2000, is over 50%, I think 52% or so in 2004. So Trump is a president elected under 50%. President Obama was over 50% both times. Trump is elected less than 50%. Is there a chance that he could be the first president who does not increase his vote margin in a re-elect who's elected less than 50%?
Well, to win, I mean, that's going to be really hard unless, Schultz gets in and he does, takes a nice 10% away from the table. But it's certainly not looking good for the president. And when people ask about, are you definitely going to vote for him or are you definitely going to vote against him? I mean, realistically, you got to be at least in the 40s, mid-40s on that question. And he's sort of on the low 40s. So, I mean, as far as his re-election prospects right now, they are in some jeopardy, and that's on the big assumption that he runs, which isn't necessarily, he may just say, hey, I made America great in record-breaking time. If it was going to take 8 years, only took 4.
Do you
I'm
believe
here.
that? Does he bug out? Does he just decide to call it a day?
You know, he's difficult to predict. But
See, you're trained as a diplomat. I feel like you're giving me a diplomatic answer.
But just from reading his Twitter feed alone, it doesn't look like he's having fun.
No,
it doesn't look like he's enjoying this job. He seems so angry. And if he's constantly telling his base that everyone out there is lying about him, I mean, we're all exhausted by this.
Yeah.
He must be exhausted as well. I think there's something to it. Maybe he doesn't want to run.
All right, we'll see. Halie, I got a little bit more. The president's been floating between 42 and 47% approval for a while now. The question is, do you think Democrats, especially those running for president in 2020, are figuring we know where he is, and thus they assume there's a 53, 58% chance? Are Democrats sort of assuming they have a shot at winning, and so there's just, some complacency around that?
I don't think there's complacency, but of course there's a great chance that a Democrat could win. He's not increasing his base. He's just speaking to those conservative Republicans who chose him in 2016 and have stuck with him through thick and through thin. But I think that as with the last election, this election will be decided by independent voters, by those who can be swayed one way or another. We saw them support Democrats overwhelmingly in the 2018 midterm elections, and there's every reason to believe that they could very well support the Democratic candidate in 2020. Yeah,
all right, Lee. Where do you see the numbers moving underneath here? Like, what's happening? Particularly, I'm concerned. I'm interested in white voters. Mm-hmm. That's Donald Trump's base.
Sure.
How are white voters digesting this president?
He's not doing as well among that group in the Midwestern states, which of course were the ones that everybody, part of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. Those areas he's not doing well in terms of his approval rating, and that being a pretty good barometer on where he stands in terms of his reelection. So
right, because what happens is his numbers can stay the same, but it depends on where those voters are, right? Yeah. You're doing a national poll. Yeah. It's not telling you what's happening inside each one of these states.
Yeah, and the Democrats don't necessarily have to win all of them. I mean, they win some. And if they can, by some chance, put Texas realistically in play this time, then the equations get really nutty very fast. But then again, this is going to be a marathon. We're just treating it as a sprint. Okay, we're going to be going on and on and on. We don't know who the Democrat candidate is by any stretch of the imagination. We don't know if they're going to hack each other up along the way and what that might do. I mean, there's still that Bernie-Hillary thing out there, and will the Democrats fall in line in the end? Or are they all going to sort of have a fractured support base for all these different candidates having a little?
You think about these states, though, that are in play. In the last election in 2018, I think what we saw is that Florida is still a place that Democrats should be worried about. They couldn't pull off a governor's win there. It got closer, but couldn't pull off the governor's win there. Obviously, the president won it last time. Do you think Florida, as much as you may know about it, do you think Florida is a place that Democrats should count on, or should they be looking for votes in other places? Is Arizona better for them? Texas? I mean, Georgia, North Carolina?
If there's anything we learned going back to the election of 2000, you can never count on Florida. Florida is always a wild card. But, I worked on the Obama campaign in Florida in 2008, and I experienced an election where a Democrat won Florida. Yeah. And it's all about going beyond your base, which is a model that everyone will have to use nationally going forward. I mean, the difference between the Kerry campaign in 2004 and the Obama campaign in 2008 in Florida was that the Obama campaign tried to go above that I-4 corridor, going beyond that solid Democratic base in South Florida. Any winning Democratic campaign in the future is going to have to do the same. You go beyond your base, you target independents.
One of the things, I was talking to someone from Andrew Gillum's governor's race in Florida, trying to understand what happened in that campaign. One of the things that they said got in trouble was when the storm hit, what it did was freeze the race in place. And so Gillum had a whole strategy to go into some of these places that he hadn't been, but he couldn't do it because the storm hit. And so there was no way for him to get to those places. So he was sort of frozen for about 10 or 20, 10 or 15 days. Yeah. So he didn't have the chance to do what Obama did.
I was absolutely struck also by the referendum on the allowing previous felons to vote, and how that passed overwhelmingly. You would have thought if the Republicans won the Senate and the governorship, that would have also gone down, yet it didn't. So there's, it's a mixed bag in Florida, which is why it's always so close.
Which is always why it's so close. That state is it's nuts. It's like 3 or 4 different places. You always got to be careful in Florida. All right, we got a lot more coming up. Exit polls show that about a quarter of Jewish voters in America voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Can he count on that number again? Welcome back. President Trump says there has never been a stronger ally for Israel than him. He touts his closest relationship with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The president is also fond of reminding people that he's got 3 Jewish grandchildren, and among Israelis, Trump is actually quite popular. According to an October survey by the Pew Research Center, 69% of voters said they had confidence in him. The president even said he could win the prime minister vote if he ran in Israel. So it might follow that Trump might have significant support from American Jewish voters, but if you think that, you'd be wrong. In fact, according to exit polls, Jewish support for Republicans dropped from 33% in 2014 to 17% in 2018. President Trump received 23% of the Jewish vote when he was elected. So Halie, it seems there is a divide between American Jews and Israeli Jews. President Trump says there's going to be a Jexodus on the American side. And the guy just keeps going. What is going on here with the Jewish vote and President Trump?
Well, the Jewish vote has been very consistent for decades. Jews, anywhere between 70 to 80% of the Jewish electorate has supported Democrats for a long time, well before President Trump. And that's because Democrats share Jewish values. Democrats are Jewish Democrats. We're not one-issue voters. Israel is very important, but Jewish voters are confident in where Democrats stand on Israel, and they're voting on a range of domestic policy issues first and foremost, including the increased threat of anti-Semitism. We did a poll in October of 2018 that showed 70% of Jewish voters disapprove with how President Trump has handled the rise of anti-Semitism in our country, including him repeating anti-Semitic tropes. So if anything, his presidency has only solidified the fact that the Democratic Party is and will continue to be the home for Jewish voters.
In Charlottesville, we saw really obvious anti-Semitic language out of those protesters. And then when the president, and we even saw someone killed by white nationalists. So when the president said that there were good people on both sides, did you see that having an impact at all in the Jewish community?
It was shocking in the Jewish community and beyond, frankly, to see our president equate neo-Nazis and white supremacists with those protesting them, and to label both, including those who had murdered an innocent protester, as very fine people, just again spoke to the values of our community and the fact that the president clearly does not share those values.
Now, I'm going to stick with you here for a second because you do this for a living.
I do.
So I want to really get the value of your insight here. What about the recent dust-up over Congresswoman Ilhan Omar on the Democratic side? And there are a lot of people, particularly on the right, who are trying to say that this is evidence of a Democratic drift away from Jewish voters and support for Israel.
Absolutely not. What we've seen in recent months has been select incidents, and Representative Omar is one such example, where we've had elected officials that were criticizing Israel, but invoked anti-Semitic negative stereotypes about Jews. And we've called that out. Our organization, the Jewish Democratic Council of America, has called out anti-Semitic tropes, whether they've come from Democrats or Republicans, including the president, including Republican leader McCarthy, and others who have trafficked in similar tropes. And what we saw the Democratic leadership do in recent weeks was actually unify the whole caucus behind a resolution resolution that rejected such tropes as a form of anti-Semitism, but also rejected all forms of intolerance, including Islamophobia. All Democrats voted for that resolution, and 23 Republicans voted against it, including Liz Cheney, who's actually joined with the president now in literally and figuratively trying to cash in on anti-Semitism. She sent out a text last week saying, "There's anti-Semitism among Democrats, contribute to the NRCC." That is using Jewish voters as pawns and trying to cash in on this moment. And Jewish voters don't want to be treated as pawns. We reject anti-Semitism wherever it emerges, and we're going to call it out. But we also are going to continue to support Democrats because they share our values.
Lee, you're looking at the numbers here, and you're seeing these trend lines. What do you see?
Well, I mean, I think from a Republican standpoint, there are always some conservative Jewish people who are going to, in the 20% of the numbers you cite, are going to be supporting the president and supporting the kinds of things that he's articulating on other issues, and then sometimes on Israel as well. The thing about the numbers is those 20% or so conservative Jewish people are what we call Republicans. Okay, these are not the Democrats or independent Jews. They tend to already be aligned with the Republicans. The question is there more to be gained by Donald Trump in a re-election campaign from the Jewish community? And the answer is, as I think was so well articulated, as long as the president is sort of hedging and staying on the fence on questions of white supremacy and nationalism, that's not going to work for a lot of Americans, and certainly it's not going to work for Jewish Americans. So that this Jexodus thing is like, my theory on this is, you do a lot better when you sort of, if you're going to go into ethnic kinds of analogies, you're pretty on safe grounds when you come up with nice phrases about your own group.
Right.
When you go off on someone else's group, you run a risk of kind of like opening up some criticism, which I think he did on that.
Yeah, I mean, you can step in it pretty easily without knowing. Yeah. I was in Israel while President Obama was in office, and I remember there was a pretty negative reaction to the president from a lot of the folks that we encountered when we were there. His poll numbers were kind of dicey in Israel. What's happening? What's the difference between how American presidents are perceived in Israel and how they're perceived in the domestic Jewish vote?
Well, as with any religious group worldwide, there's no homogenous kind of political view of Jews. American Jews have a very different political orientation than Israelis for various reasons. As I mentioned, Jews in the United States are focused and vote specifically on domestic issues, including the rise of anti-Semitism domestically. We polled in October, 92% of them consider themselves pro-Israel. These are American Jews, but 56% said that they were critical of at least some of the Israeli government's policies. So it's not exactly apples to apples to compare where the American Jewish electorate is with the Israeli electorate. They're prioritizing different issues.
Yeah. All right. So we've got a lot more coming up on this. Jewish voters made up around 3% of the total electorate in 2016. A drop like what we saw with the president is still significant. Do we see any real movement toward President Trump here?
Absolutely not. To the contrary, again, his presidency has only solidified the fact that the Democratic Party is the political home for Jews. You mentioned the statistics between 2014 and 2018, but in 2016 even, 24% of Jews supported Trump, and as Lee said, they're called Republicans, but it dropped to 17% in 2018. And those votes that he lost didn't just come from independents. They also came from Republicans that were coming over to support Democrats because his values are so antithetical to Jewish values. So he's actually lost support in the Jewish community, leading us to conclude Jexodus is no more than a Republican-contrived fantasy.
All right, so we got a lot of religion and faith coming up here. Lee, Trump picked up more than 50% of Christian voters, which make up about 70 to 75% of the U.S. electorate. What have the trends showed us about religious affiliation and party identity, broadening it out from just the Jewish voters?
Well, I mean, I think, we're seeing a lot of interesting things with younger people who have high religiosity, but not necessarily connected to institutional religion as much as their older counterparts. And so I think what we're seeing in terms of demographic shifts over time is younger folks are not necessarily identifying with a particular religion or set of rituals as much as they are still believing in a supreme being, but not necessarily going to be practicing as much as they have.
But are you seeing faith or religious affiliation as an indicator of political affiliation?
Well, we see the divisions are there. I mean, that hasn't changed that much. But to go back to the younger folks, I mean, that's a group that is going to be very, very important as they mobilized and have in the midterm elections last time, and that their group, this so-called millennial generation and others, articulate a certain set of values about tolerance and the like, and those could be called in Judeo-Christian tradition, and that's where they will increasingly become a greater part of the electorate.
It's always been frustrating to me to hear the conversation about Christian support for presidents and how for Republicans, and how the president's supposed to be the Republican president is supposed to be the one that gets this sort of Christian support, while people don't talk about the fact that millions of African Americans are pretty conservative Christians in many cases, or at least mainline Christians, and they're not counted when you're thinking about what's happening in the Christian vote when it comes time for Republicans. What they're really talking about are conservative white Christians. It seems like we're sort of hesitant to use the word white Christians.
And the Hispanic community is very conservative on social values as well.
Yeah.
So that's part of that.
And have you seen any coalitions being built across faith lines to really take on some of the kind of white supremacy and white nationalist issues that have been popping up even more and more? I mean, the Southern Poverty Law Center has chronicled, we were on the show a week ago, talking about a 30% increase in hate crimes that have happened from 2014 to 2017. Are there cross-faith coalitions that are trying to deal with this question?
Absolutely. And in the aftermath of the tragic shooting in Pittsburgh at the Pittsburgh Synagogue in October, we as a Jewish organization and many Jewish organizations heard from Muslim organizations, importantly, because they too have been targeted. And in the aftermath of this tragic event in New Zealand, where two mosques were targeted, we reached out to Muslim organizations to speak in one voice, saying that this form of intolerance and frankly the hatred and that has been emboldened by this presidency is really unacceptable, and we call it out in all of its forms. So we are seeking to send a message of solidarity with Muslims who now feel that they are increasingly targeted in the aftermath of that terrible attack last week.
I think one thing that we know, regardless of the politics, is once we get started on this demonization wheel of groups, that wheel turns. And your group may not be first, but you might still be on the cusp of that wheel. Yeah. All right, coming up, the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship, aka March Madness, some people are calling it, begins in earnest tomorrow. How many Americans will be following it? The NCAA Men's Basketball Championship is getting started tomorrow. 64 teams competing in this year's March Madness, vying for that elusive national championship. So we want to know what percentage of Americans will be following the big dance. I'm going to start with you, Halie, because not only what percentage are paying attention, I want to know who's going to win, by how many points, and what day you think the national championship will be.
Okay, well, as someone who doesn't follow basketball at all, no, but I actually think that there might be a positive correlation between those who don't follow and those who can win the brackets, because I've seen it happen. So I'm going to say Michigan State. And
you don't have to do this part.
I grew up in East Lansing.
Yes, all right, seriously, what percentage?
You worked your way very well out of that, I think.
Yes, okay, I'll start with you, Lee. What percentage of Americans do you think are paying attention?
I was going to say 51 in honor of my 5 foot 1 inches of height, but I'll say 45. 45%.
45. And do you see Marist doing well?
No. Our men's basketball team is doing better, but is not in the NCAAs. The women came within one game of making it.
The women came within one game of making
going
it,
to the,
but not the men.
Yeah.
So these are the Red Foxes.
Yes.
I understand they were 12-19 this season.
That was a good year. We're getting there. It's been a while since Rick Smits was on our team. It's been a while.
All right, I couldn't let you out of here without giving you a little crap too. So here's the answer that we found.
Okay.
According to a new YouGov poll, 38% of Americans will be following March Madness. You're pretty close in there. Just 15% are planning on participating in any pools or brackets this year. But 60% say they participate in pools or brackets with friends or family just for fun, right? So people do this around the office, they do it in school, everybody's just sort of having a good time around March Madness.
Has he whet your appetite for this? No.
I have found that those who know nothing about basketball can still win the bracket. Sometimes it helps.
What's your sport? What do you like?
Gymnastics.
Gymnastics. Who's your team?
UCLA.
UCLA. All right, so when we get to time for the gymnastics pre-Olympic gymnastic qualifications, we're bringing you back.
She's the one.
Okay, great.
That's good. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank all of you for watching us today. Once again, my name is Jamal Simmons, and you can find more of my work here on Hill TV. I'm also at Jamal Simmons on Twitter, or Real Jamal Simmons on Facebook and Instagram. I want you all to come back tomorrow. We're going to continue our conversation on the president's job approval, but this time we'll dig into some of the trends we've noticed over the past several months since we started tracking it. Now we know what America's thinking. We'll see you next time.